Welcome, Amy and Catherine and Lori. Hi, everyone. It is exactly 11:15. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I just want to remind you of a few housekeeping rules before we get started. Microphones and cameras should be turned off. This does slow the session down when they're on. If you have comments and questions, please try to keep it through the chat. I'll be monitoring that the whole time. At the end, there will be time for questions and answers with the presenter. She'll have a slideshow and notes that will be available after the conference on the conference website. And hopefully you are supposed to be in. Welcome to take your online learning community from ho-hum to awesome in 3 easy steps. Today, our presenter is ERIN Faherty. ERIN is a full-time, fully online English instructor at ECTC. She develops shells for online adjuncts. She's an online course developer for KCTCS, an inaugural KOOL Academy participant. And for today, maybe most importantly, she is a 2020 Blackboard ECP Award winner. So ERIN, I'll let you take over.
Hi guys. Thank you so much for coming to today's session. I know we're kind of the last time slot, and it's Friday. Yay! But thank you for coming. So hopefully we're gonna jump right in here in a minute and get going because I don't wanna keep you over, we have sort of a limited time frame. So today's session is really going to be about your online learning community and specifically student engagement. But before we get started, I think people are still kind of coming in. Let me just kind of give you a rundown. This is going to be a very interactive session. So we're going to have some discussion. We're also going to have a breakout group activity. And so we're going to put you into groups here at the very beginning here just to kind of get them set up. And then we were not going to spend any time in those groups. We're just going to come back to the main group and then we'll be putting you back in them at the end of the class. But I just didn't want to interrupt the flow once we get started with our actual work in class themselves. If you don't use Collaborate a lot, they have improved their breakout groups. If you haven't noticed, where now you can set up your groups like you want them and then pause them and it brings everybody back to the main room. And then when you're ready to go back to your breakout group, you just unpause them or resume and you go back that way. So you can go back and forth but keep people in the same groups, which is really kind of cool. We're going to cross our fingers that it works as it's supposed to today, but if it doesn't, we'll just work it out and deal with it. So all right, so I'm going to do that really quick. Let me go ahead and get our breakout groups kind of started. So let me see. We have about 30 people, so let's do. All right, so we've got those randomly assigned. Okay, so I think we're kind of back, and we'll deal with the people that are coming in sort of late at a later time frame. But hopefully everybody is back in the main room. Can we get a show of hands, or just yell out if you want to that we're all back together again? It looks like we are. Yay, it worked. You never know. Sometimes you think it will work and it doesn't. So we're good now. All right, so let's kind of jump into the presentation. So let me get that going for you. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera because it does seem to slow down from my end on my network connection. So I'm going to do that right now before we get going. All right. All right. So today's session is about our learning community and our online learning community. I'm assuming since you guys are in today's session that you are interested in working more with your online learning community or student engagement, or maybe that you have seen the challenges that those things pose, especially in an online class. So I kind of wanted to start the morning off with just having you guys give me some of the things or some of the challenges that you've seen with your online courses in terms of learner engagement or the online learning community. What are some of those challenges? And Stephanie, do you want them to put it in chat? Can they just yell it out on their microphone? Do you want them to raise their hand?
If they could raise their hands, we'll call on them, but if not, they can put it in their chat.
Okay.
Or if they just want to say something. Cheating
Oh,
and late assignments
okay.
is their first one, and then not able to talk with each student. We've got them coming through
Okay.
the chat, so
I got it. I see them. Okay, we're good. Okay, students disappear. Oh, that's a big one. That's a big one. And it's so easy for students to do that in an online course because they basically just shut their laptop down and they never have to see you again. So it's certainly easy for them to do that, for sure. Oh, and students not realizing direction. So a lot of what you're talking about really has to do with the engagement process. And I do think that, yeah, all of the above. I do think that students struggle with this. They struggle with sometimes engaging not only with each other, but with us as instructors in an online class, and of course, even with the content for a variety of reasons. And I feel like since the pandemic, some of that is even worse than it was beforehand. You would think that students, because they at least were kind of forced into an online course during that process, that they would be more comfortable with it. But I don't really think that that has happened. I sometimes see more issues now than I did previously. Okay, so hopefully those are some challenges. We will kind of address some of those as we move through today's session in terms of really improving your online learning community. So really what we're going to talk about today is developing an online learner engagement strategy. We are going to discuss potential peer-to-peer activities, and we're going to sort of create learner-led content. So sounds like a lot to do. Hopefully it won't be too much and we will get through it pretty easily. Yeah, I just saw the last one, students signing up for courses and then not really taking part in them. So we're going to talk about some of those issues too. So, all right, one of the things I wanted to start with really is step one of what do we do to improve our online engagement, because really that's the key to success. If students are engaged in your course, they are going to be engaged with the content. And so those two things kind of go hand in hand. They learn the content really only if they're really engaged with the course. And so, what are some things that we can do to get them engaged, get them really involved in the course itself? And so, step one for me has been to develop an online learner engagement strategy. And that is a mouthful to say. But basically, what it is a plan that we implement into our courses that really encourage student engagement. And what I mean by that is we have a plan, or I have a plan that wants to take my students from the beginning of the semester where they are then to where I want them to be at the end of the semester. And so, how do you do that? There's all kinds of ways that you can do that, but the way that I use basically uses what I call phases of engagement. And that's really what we're going to focus on today, is what these phases are and how can we incorporate them into our class. And really what I try to do is use these phases as a way to kind of move students through steps, try to move students through the steps in the engagement process. And so what I've created here is a strategy template, and I'm going to go ahead and put these in the chat. So let me stick them here. You can download these. There are two versions of this template. One version is for a 16-week class, and the other version is for an 8-week class. If you don't know, ECTC has gone to an 8-week semester. So the majority of our classes here are all taught in 8 weeks. And so I had to adjust the template I've been using for a couple of years to kind of meet that need. So there are two templates there. Feel free to grab them out of the chat if you want to and download them to your computer. We will be using this template later on in today's session, but I just wanted to kind of have you be able to look at it if you need to right now. So in a nutshell, this template basically is a planning document. It's something that I use before each class, and I change it a lot, actually. I mean, I'm never really satisfied with anything I do, so I do a lot of changes in my course. But I have the freedom to do that. I teach fully online, and so I have that freedom to kind of play around with my classes as I need to. But the template has several elements to it. One, it has the phase that's listed, and we're going to talk about those in more depth. It has the learner role, it has my role in the class, it has what weeks are appropriate for that particular phase. It has the process. In other words, what am I trying to do in this phase with my students? And then it has a place for me to list potential activities that I want to use in the class themselves. So it's just basically a quick and dirty way to kind of plan for your engagement that you have in the class. Now, I will say this, I did not come up with the strategy on my own. Years ago, I read a book called Engaging the Online Learner by Rita Mae Conrad and Anna Donaldson. And it's like my Bible. I use it every semester. It's constantly, I have it as a Kindle version. So it's constantly on my computer. I'm always checking it to get some ideas. So I highly recommend it if you haven't read it to read that book. It's really, really good. Of course, I took their strategy and made it work for me. So I've adjusted it and customized it to work for me. And then I created a template because I'm a planner and I like to plan all my classes out. And this was a way that I could see what I'm doing and see those phases on paper, which made it much easier for me to do. So feel free to use the template as you need to and customize it as you need to. All right, so I want to kind of explain what this strategy is, especially in terms of the phases. So, um, phase one for me is what I call the interact and connect phase for my students. And if you notice, we're all kind of equal in the icons on this slide. So what I mean by that is that my role is pretty involved in this phase. I'm, creating the assignment. I'm giving some specific guidelines for students to do, and then, but the purpose is for them to, of course, interact with each other and connect with each other. We do this so naturally in our face-to-face classes, but as most things, anything that we try to translate from face to face to online is always a little bit more difficult. And that includes getting students to interact and engage and connect with each other. So typical in this phase would be some activity might be like an icebreaker that you do in your course. What I like to do though is make sure that my icebreakers always have an element of finding common ground. In other words, I want students to be able to find something in common with other students. And one, helps them to establish a connection, sure, but I also use it to move them into phase two, which I'll explain in a second. Um, the other thing is that this phase would be appropriate, of course, at the beginning of your classes, because you remember your students are coming in, they tend to be newbies. Even if they're, they have a good grasp on technology. They may not have taken a Blackboard class before. I teach a lot of, freshmen. So I teach 101 and 102. Typically, those are freshman students. In my 101 class, especially, they need a lot more hand holding. And so I find that the icebreaker is really important in that particular class for sure. But we want to move our students. We don't want them to stay phase because they don't really do anything. They're just kind of interacting and making a connection, if you will. So my goal is to move them into phase 2 because I'm wanting them to become more and more engaged with the course and the content as we go through the semester. So in phase 2, what I typically will do is this is the think and share phase. And so I want students to begin to think about content in the class and sort of learn to share with each other because honestly, that can be a little daunting for students to do with each other is to share online their ideas. The other thing that I do in this phase is I typically put students in pairs. So remember when I said in phase 1 that I have them find some sort of common ground? I use that to kind of determine how I should pair up students in the class. So if I go through the first activity and notice that students have a good rapport with each other, I try to put those people together. It's just like a face-to-face course. If you do a small group and you do a icebreaker at the beginning of the class, people will gravitate towards people they have something in common with. And so that's what I'm trying to create an atmosphere where they have sort of common ground, if you will. So in this phase, they're in pairs, and I still keep the activities in this phase simple. So if you're in a 16-week course, you might have students in phase 2, say in weeks 3 and 4 in class. For me, it might be in week 2 in an 8-week class. So I'm moving them much more quickly through these phases. But typically, the activities would be pretty simple. I don't want them to, break their brains here at this point, but I do make the activities more academically oriented. So, for example, I might have students do something like if they're in their pairs, I might have them discuss the concepts for the week or the homework they had to do for the week, what their understanding um, is of that homework, what insights they gain, but have them discuss that together. And it's just a way for them to be able to put their thoughts to paper and share those thoughts. So remember, the key point here is to share their ideas. Sometimes you can even take that a little bit further and have them critique ideas. So not only do they have to share, then they have to kind of comment and critique on what their peer said about those concepts or whatever. So the activity itself is pretty simple, but what's happening is it helps to sort of build the rapport between the students doing this particular activity. And it's beginning to get them thinking about the academic world. We're moving them from sort of this personal focus into more of the academic world of college, if you will. Another activity I might do in this phase would be a weekly contest where I pair up students and they have to sort of find websites or whatever that goes along with that week's concepts, and they all have to be original, so no one can duplicate websites, so everybody has to read everybody else's group's URLs. And so it's just a way to kind of keep them engaged with that process and the learning process. So that is phase 2. But again, not a lot going on here, a little bit of critical thinking, not a whole bunch, because the goal is I want them to get into phase 3, which is where I think the true collaboration comes from in a classroom. If you notice, my role is a little bit smaller, and so I really see myself as a facilitator once I have students in this particular phase. And again, in a 16-week class, this might be weeks 5 and 6 in your class, um, just depending on how much time that you want to spend on some of these things. Now, what I do in this particular phase is I take my students who are in pairs in phase 2 and I put them together. So I take 2 pairs and group them together for a group of 4. Sometimes it's a group of 5, just depends on, how your class is made up. I have done as many as 3 groups together, 3 pairs together for 6. I've experimented with bigger than that, but I find that 6 is kind of the limit. So if they go to 8 to 10, there's just not really enough there. you tend to have students that don't do anything. And so keeping it small and intimate has served me better in my own classes. But you may have a different experience than me. But that is the goal, is I put them in a group in this phase. Now, what I want them to do with collaboration is that I want them to now start building on each other's ideas. So in the last phase, we really had them doing academically oriented things. But in phase 3, I really try to make it content based. So I want it to be something specifically about the content in the class. So I'm trying to engage them not only with each other at this phase, but really with what we're learning in the class itself. And so um, I want them to build on each other's ideas. Typically, with an activity in this particular phase, I would have them do some sort of synthesis at the end of the activity. So they do whatever the activity is, and then as a group, have to kind of synthesize that experience at as sort of the end thing that they do for that activity. And so that just kind of creates this environment of collaboration in the class. Again, this can be a complex kind of thing that you want them to do, or a simple kind of thing. One of the things that I might do in here is a group contract. So what I will have students do in these groups is to work together to come up with their group rules. So they have to determine how they're going to communicate with each other, how they are going to, if they're going to meet about, various activities they have to do, what does that schedule look like? How are they going to handle students who don't pull their weight? And I have them create that themselves by building on each other's ideas. And then they tend to have more ownership over that too, because they've kind of created the contract with each other, if you will. So that's a good activity that I do in this phase. And then another one, you could do something like a debate in your four. I'm an English teacher, so we do a lot of pro con kinds of things in class, especially when we're learning about argument. And so I can have two pairs within the group that sort of have a debate, a pro con debate on an issue, and then they have to the other pair does as well, and then they come together as the four and kind of write a little synthesis about their experience with the pro con process. And so again, the sky's the limit. You can be as creative as you want to with some of these assignments, but the ultimate goal is really getting them to collaborate and build on each other's ideas. The last phase is right what I consider really the pinnacle of the learning experience for my students, is really phase 4, which is where I want students to kind of lead, design, or create themselves. So this is a learner-led activity, and now I use groups. You can certainly follow these phases with as individual assignments or individual activities. They don't all have to be, I just tend to use the groups as a way to really keep my students engaged with each other. So, but an English class really lends itself to doing that. But you could certainly have individual activities in each of these phases. But phase 4, if you notice, it's kind of flipped, right? I'm now an audience member. I'm no longer really the facilitator. I'm just there to be a community member or an audience member, and my students take control and either design or lead or create something. So again, this doesn't really have to be a very complicated thing. You can have students design and lead a class discussion. You can have students do a group presentation, or even a short video together of, say, a concept in the class. But the idea is that they kind of take ownership and create something themselves. So those are the phases in a nutshell that I actually use. And so I kind of wanted to get your interpretation, if you will, of the template. If you would you be able to use something like that? Is this a strategy that you think would work with your subject matter or not? And we'll just take like a minute or two. So just throw out some ideas or your immediate response to some of these things.
If I can use the speaker, this is Jerry Michael Combs from Hazard, and I really like this template because one of the things that I have trouble with is getting students to do peer review. So I sort of feel like I could take students on that journey where I could, the instructor led would be there at the beginning while they're newbies would be some, mini lessons that I would do. And then I would take them through with the pair and then with the group to actually have engaging peer review. I think that's excellent.
There, there's a question about, do you set up different groups for a class of 30 online? Do you see the question? How do they have them schedule time for a group session online again, especially if you want to facilitate all sessions?
So I'm trying to read it. I was wondering, so should you said. Okay, so I'm assuming you're meaning like a synchronous session. Um, and I'm sorry, I was talking and had my mic turned off. I apologize. But yes, so uh, in a synchronous, yes, you could do 15 groups. So if you're doing a collaborate session and you use the breakout sessions, you can set up those groups however you want to set them up. And if you use groups in the classes, you can use those same groups in your collaborate session. So I do have, like, I do I put my sections together and then put them in small groups. So I might have a lot of pairs in my class. So it can be a little bit difficult from an instructor standpoint sometimes keeping up with that, but I just make it part of my day that I'm checking in with to see how those groups are doing. Yes. Okay. So in an online course also. Yes. So if you, yes, so you can have those groups set up and you might have 15 groups if you're doing pairs for sure. Um, and let me make sure I'm answering the question. Did I answer it? So you should be able to set those groups up. And so what you end up having, at least I do in my class, several sets of groups. So you have the pairs and so you can, so in ultra, well, we in ultra you can have, she's asking to use a calendar to get them to sign up for a time to meet. They can, so they can set that up in a group project. If you're putting the project in your class, they can certainly do that. I don't necessarily, when I have them do a group project, I sometimes require them to meet, sometimes I let it be up to them. Here's why. My students take my class because they need the class typically for some reason. So I like to make it asynchronous. I don't necessarily like to do a lot of required synchronous meetings. So for students, I ask them to really consider their classmates' schedules so that there is a way for someone who, say, works the night shift and can't meet during their 4 o'clock meeting time, that there's a way for that student to still participate. So I hope I addressed that. So I don't make it where they have to meet and sign up at the same time. So yes, it can cause some disruption. So what she's asking about disappearing students. So really what you have to do is you have to try to be involved in that on the front end. So if you're in the pair section and you notice someone's not participating, I typically will move the person who's let me know or that I've noticed to a different group at that point. Most times that takes care of it. The disappearing students might be paired. I've tried it both ways. I've paired them with another disappearing student just to see if they can interact with each other. But sometimes what happens is those disappearing students stay disappeared. I mean, it is the nature of what we do. But what happens is instead of having two people disappear from that original group, the one that was willing to work is now able to engage and stay engaged throughout the course. I find that when I'm not involved with that process early on, I find that some of the students who experience the frustration then don't necessarily stay either. So I try to kind of nip that in the bud early on in the class itself. Okay, so hopefully I've answered some of your questions there. Let me go ahead and jump back into our presentation. So step one really is about the planning. How are you going to plan some of the activities? And like I mentioned, if you struggle a little bit with groups in the class, you can kind of do this in other ways. But it is an important piece, I should say, um, with the online class to have some sort of peer-to-peer interaction in the class, because it does make peers accountable to each other, and sometimes that's what keeps them in the class. So if they think, oh, I've got to do this because my group's depending on me or this person's depending on me, it can be that extra incentive to keep them sort of going in the class, if you will. And also, if they know that you're going to be kind of involved and looking in that and interacting with them, then that kind of gives them that extra incentive as well. All right, so step two is about incorporating peer-to-peer activities. And what I mean specifically phases 1 through 3. In this case, I've created sort of a checklist that I use myself to make sure that the activities are appropriate to the phase that I want them to be in. So, for example, in the icebreakers, I want them to be fun. I want them to be person focused. And then, like I said, I always have an element where they have to find some kind of common ground with one of their classmates. And then in the phase 2 for me with pair partners, I want to keep this activity pretty simple. I want it to be academically um, oriented, and I want them to be able to share their ideas here. And then in the last phase, or the third phase, as their teams, I want it to be more about critical thinking. I want them to build on each other's ideas, and I want them to have sort of a synthesized response. So that's kind of a checklist that I use. You could use it too, or not, whatever, but that's what I use to kind of guide my designing of some of these activities. All right, so before we move on, I do want to mention two types of activities that I think are really helpful to have in your class. One is a reflective activity, which or I do them throughout my whole class because they can be really easy. I usually have students keep a journal of what I call aha moments, where the light bulb goes off, that they can kind of talk about or write about in their journals. But there's all kinds of ways that you can do reflection. I like it because, one, it allows students to kind of gain insight into their learning experience themselves. But by the same token, for instructors, it really allows us to evaluate student experience. Like, I get a lot of insight from these reflective activities when I see multiple students saying things like, I didn't really understand this. It gives me kind of a clue, oh, I need to put more information in about that particular concept or whatever. So I use reflection a lot, and they're really easy to kind of put in your class, and they're really engaging for students to take part in. The second type of activity is an authentic activity. Some of us teach in subjects that I think make that a lot more easy for students to do or to have in your class. I always think about subjects like nursing where what they're doing in class directly relates to what they're doing out in the workforce. Sometimes when you teach a general ed class like English, they're not so sure about, oh well, yeah, I know writing's important, but there's not a direct correlation. So sometimes I feel like I have to be a little bit more creative about having some authentic activities in the class. But if they're authentic activities, they really do build skills that go beyond the class. And I think for that reason, they can be really impactful in your classes. So the first activity I want you guys to do, and we're going to do this very quickly, and we're not going to be put in groups for this. This is an individual activity. If you look at that template, um, take 2 to 3 minutes and just think about a potential peer-to-peer activity that would be appropriate to one of the phases. You don't have to do them for every phase, but just pick one, phases 1 through 3. What activity could you do that would fit in that phase? And then be willing to share at least one of those activities with the class. Everybody's not going to share. We have a pretty big group today. But I'll take 3 or 4 volunteers to share what one of those activities might be. That way we can all hear it, and kind of learn from each other. So just grab those templates if you haven't already, and just spend, I'd say, 2 minutes, and we'll reconvene in 2 minutes.
And Erin, in case you can't see, we're at about 8 minutes left in this session.
Thank you, Stephanie. All right, guys. So we had a nursing. So we had for a nursing class, nursing students grade each other's skills videos before submitting to the instructor. That's a great assignment. Does anybody else have one that they could share? Oh, PowerPoint is shared in. Oh, I'm sorry, reading something from earlier. How about we get one more example? Oral histories, interview, love that. I have a colleague that does that every semester. Those are fascinating. Okay, so you guys are already doing this one. Phase 1, reading students share their reading histories as introductions. Love that too. So you've connected it to what they're going to be doing in the class. So that's a great assignment as well. Yes, peer introductions. Really good. I hope you know, guys, I'm going to be stealing your ideas too. So just letting you know that in advance. All right, so let's kind of jump ahead into step 3. We're going to go through this really quickly, but we're going to have implement some learner-led activities, which is, of course, phase 4. And like I said earlier, kind of the pinnacle of academic learning for me. And so I have kind of a different checklist. But the 3 most important things on this checklist for this assignment for me is that one is all about time, because I'm limited in time in 8 weeks for sure. But I want to make sure that I've introduced this idea that they're going to be creating or leading something together, at least a 16-week class, that would be 2 weeks before they actually start planning it. In my 8-week class, it's usually at least 1 week. So it gives them time to kind of ruminate about this activity before they actually start working on it or planning it. The other thing is to give them adequate time to plan it. So, these students all have differing schedules, of course, and it can be very difficult for them to coordinate with each other. And so I want to make sure that they have enough time to kind of do that. So I try to get students through phase 3 by midterm, and then have phase 4 be kind of the project or the activity that we do in the second half of the semester, if you will. All right, so I'm going to put you guys back in your groups really quick, and we're going to just do this sort of super quick. We're going to, I'll tell you what, I think we're going to just stay because we're so short on time. I'm changing my mind. And I'm allowed, so I think that's okay. All right, so this last activity really is about a learner-led activity. So some of you shared what you do in phases 1 through 3. If you just take a minute to put some thoughts together about what would be a good learner-led activity for your class that you could use, say, in this phase 4 section, and kind of be able to just walk us through what that assignment is. So if you have a microphone, that'd be great. You can do that and do it verbally, or if you need to do it in chat, that's okay too. But be able to kind of walk us through that particular assignment. So take about 2 minutes, if you will, and kind of put your thoughts down. You don't have to create an assignment from scratch, of course. You can just have an idea for what a good learner-led assignment might be, and then we'll kind of talk about those when you come back. So let's take 2 to 3 minutes to get that done. All right, guys. So what you got for me? What kinds of ideas do you have for having sort of some activities, learner-led activities in phase 4?
So this is Jerry Michael again. I was sort of thinking, I teach English as well, and I was sort of thinking about having students create some resource, maybe even ask them if there is a resource that I used that they think they could improve on for students in my next semester's classes. So that, they could decide what is most, what the most important aspects of the class, what the most important aspects were, and they could sort of design whatever. Is it a handout? Is it a brochure? Is it a video? That I then would present to my classes the next semester.
I love it. So it's giving you feedback too that you can then incorporate as something that students really found useful, etc., for your classes too.
Yeah, and it's a great final assignment, I think. In lieu of a sort of formal final exam, it's really a chance for students to show what they took away and what they think is the most important aspect of learning to communicate well and write.
I love that. That's a great assignment. Definitely. Um, I'm already thinking of ways I could incorporate that into my class. So thank you very much. And then some people are saying they have individual students design a game based on an event or movement in history. Oh my God, I love that. I've been trying to incorporate some kind of gaming thing in my classes too, just because I think they've just engaged with that process. So that's great. So definitely, not only is it learner led, but it's also very creative. So nice job there. Okay. You guys, I'm sorry we kind of ran out of time. I know we spent a lot of time early on in the discussion itself, but I do want to thank you for your participation today, and hopefully you have some takeaways. I hope it wasn't too rushed for you and that you were able to have some insight and start thinking about some ways that you can incorporate some of these phases into your classes themselves. If you have any questions, feel free to stay behind or send them to me in an email. I'll be happy to answer them after the session's over.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much, ERIN, for presenting today. Don't forget to do the evaluation form if you have time. We appreciate you all coming to KOOL Conference this year.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.